The next session will consist of two speakers. The first speaker is S.Malik, who is a reader at the University of Goldsmiths in the art department, and is currently on sabbatical or as a research fellow at Bard, Centre for Curatorial Studies. And Suhail is going to deliver a paper for us today, and then afterwards, directly afterwards, we are going to be given a discussion by H.Dostoğlu, I can pronounce it right, who is the founding director of Gallery Nev in Istanbul. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. And then after Haldun has talked, we will open the discussion. So we'll have Suhail first, then Haldun, and then we'll have a discussion afterwards. So Suhail, welcome. Many thanks for coming and participating in our debate. And over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, and also thank you to Fulia for the invitation, and also many thanks to the incredible team for the work in organising these events and getting here. No thanks to Antonia, because my talk will be nowhere near as interesting or entertaining, but I will just deliver a paper straightforwardly. In this talk, I'm going to take up the relationship in the blurb. The relationship between private capital, contemporary artistic production, and the making of publics. The main claim I'll make is that the relationship is the structural coherence between contemporary art, on the one hand, and national and global reorganizations of wealth and power of the last 30, 40 years or so in favor of elite wealth, which significantly transforms what a public is, and also how a public is. One limitation of my presentation is that the argument's based on prevalent Euro-American market structures for both art and finance. But since I think these structures are the core conditions for the transnational milieu of contemporary art, which we're now in right now, and also for global circulation and investment of large-scale private capital, these limitations, I think, are not too restrictive for the topic in this context. Now, the primary claim is that the particular structure of commerce, reputation, and power in the art market is not only subject to increasing concentration of wealth towards the already most wealthy. By concentration of wealth, I mean that an increasing share of national and global wealth is in the hands of fewer and fewer of the population, resulting in ever greater economic inequalities between the richest and the rest. It's no longer a question of, as we know, it's no longer a question of the richest and the poorest, but just of the richest and the rest. It's not just that claim, but that contemporary art is a key vector for that process of greater inequality, and for precise reasons intrinsic to the social operation of the contemporary art field, and also to the modern notion of a public. So the talk will take three elements. Firstly, the art market. Secondly, neoliberalism as the process of national and global wealth concentration. And thirdly, the transformation of the public as both a venue and transmission mechanism for contemporary art and neoliberalism. So let's start with the art market. Contemporary art market, and this is probably familiar to to some of you anyway. The contemporary art market is split into what I call the primary market and the secondary market. The secondary market, which is originally dedicated to reselling work between collectors, usually of dead artists, is more or less an open market, or it's supposed to be, and most often organized through auctions and resales of art. Prices are advertised, though not always fairly or at market value, and generally artists earn nothing from these sales. That's the kind of auction scene. The primary market, which I'll spend most of this talk describing, the primary market is the dealer-collector commercial network, often organized through gallery spaces. In these markets, artists get a cut of the sales price, usually about 50%, and the price is negotiated on a more or less case-by-case basis by the dealer and the gallerist. One of the central concerns for any serious gallerist or collector is not just the price, of course, but the art is well placed, which is to say that the sale of the work is determined not only by price, as I've said, but also to enhance the reputation of all those parties, the artist, the collector, and the dealer. Okay? Reputational value is as important as price value. And the work has to be well placed so that the career profile and cultural importance of all parties, not just the artist, of all parties can be cultivated over time. Now, since the sale of art on the primary market is set by these important conditions and observations, which are not even primarily about price, the primary market is in fact a quasi-commercial market. Rather than setting prices by market forces, the primary market protects art and artists' careers from being subject to market pressures. The primary market is then characterized by long-term, mutually supportive, relation-building protective networks. Distinct to open markets, sometimes even opposed to them, open markets being organized for short-term gains through history-less exchanges, the primary market is a quasi-market of moral agents because it protects those who are involved in it from market forces. Okay? So the primary market is a quasi-market of moral agents. And this is often emphasized through a declaration of care for the art or the artist, or that it takes place, the transactions on the primary market take place in the name of the love of art. But all of this is only to reiterate at a subjective level that the primary market is, as we all know, a cartel. It's a cartel for three reasons. Firstly, it operates on the basis of informal and unaccountable transactions, such that its members support one another according to personal preferences without regulation or transparent criteria. It's a cartel, secondly, because the transactions of the secondary market, which are the sort of public face, if you want, of the art market, the transactions of the secondary market are made by actors in the primary market themselves, who sometimes manipulate market prices and visibility in the secondary market to publicize transactions in the primary market. Okay, so the secondary market is mobilized and used by actors in the primary market in order to have effects within the primary market itself, usually manipulative effects. So the distinction between primary and secondary markets is a formal one, but it's useful, it's strategically useful and tactically useful to mobilize prices and reputations across the art market. And the third reason why the primary market is a cartel is that the deals and understandings of how and why certain works appear in certain places at certain times is made behind the scenes, over the usual circuit of parties, dinners, private conversations, and all is kept from public view. While the art and its discourses are given credit by being in public through the exhibition format, through the discourses of criticism, publication, and so on, the power over these decisions is itself private, decided in public invisibility. The main point here is that the primary market and its participants can be maintained as moral agents against open marketization because they are a cartel. Okay. The primary market can be maintained as a moral agency because there's a cartel. Equally, primary market cartelization is taken as a moral good because it ensures that art is protected from the rapacious demands of mere pricing and its effects from the open market. Cartelization protects the art market from the forces of the open market, which is why it's a moral cause to cartelize the art market, primary art market. So with respect to both market forces and to art, negatively and positively if you want, the primary market is then morally virtuous. It's a virtuous undertaking organized in the name of art's virtue contra marketization, that virtue being art's irreducibility to price. The practical corollaries of this moral virtue include that the primary market operates at any instant in a coherent duality of power, switching as needs be between market operations and moral cause, usually both at once. What this means is that a commercial transaction in the primary market, a sale, is in this way also a moral act. The primary market is not only impervious to the usual criticisms of marketization, that everything is reduced to price and profit and that this is wrong, but moreover, primary market stands behind and supports that criticism in order to maintain its own cartelization. Okay, so the primary market is behind and supports the criticism of marketization, despite the fact that it itself is a market of a certain kind. What is key here is that the cartel of the primary market is not limited to the art market and the dealer-collector nexus, who are after all just private actors, so why not? The cartelization of the primary market extends also to the so-called public or quasi-public institutions of art. The issue here is not just that the major institutions of art exhibition are now directly or indirectly venues for large-scale private collections, which we're familiar enough with, nor that the remaining state-funded museums cannot compete with private foundations in the art market in acquisition of work. The logic of virtuous markets, which I've just mentioned, makes it clear how and why such mobilization of private wealth and accumulation can be understood and presented as moral agency. Okay? It seems to me that's not the real concern about the way in which public art institutions are no longer in fact public, but monopolized by major collectors. In addition to that, art and cultural public institutions serve to secure and enhance the placement, which I spoke about earlier, the placement of art on the practical and moral terms set by the primary market cartel. Okay? The point here being that public exhibition is yet another moment, another enactment of that cartel's moral good, because as we all know, public exhibition is a way to place work and give it a visibility which enhances the reputation and therefore supports the logics and structures of the primary market cartel. There are a number of reasons for this. Practically, the cost of the art exhibited in public spaces is heavily subsidized by the galleries, dealers, and collectors supporting these artists, by the support structure of the cartel. Regarding placement, these exhibitions enhance and secure the reputation of the artist, doing so precisely beyond the limited audience of art world specialists, such as us, I guess. Right? They present the work to a public as being of public importance, of importance beyond the limited constraints and confines of the art world. This reputational enhancement operationally consolidates cartelization. Because public recognition means greater cultural presence, public exposure solidifies the staying power of the artist. Price increases are a nice benefit of such enhancement, but not necessary or essential. This circuit of reinforcement of established powers is sometimes called a recognition of art's quality. Okay. The argument or the claim being that it's the quality art that gets to appear in public exhibitions as opposed to commercial work or something like this. It seems to me that this is in fact just another name for a reinforcement of the established powers of the primary market as a cartel. Reliant on commercial galleries to present art in public view, presenting art that is mainly filtered through that sector, the primary market sector, if it is not anyway the collection of its founding patrons, of the major institutions, and serving the virtuous morality of that market, public exhibition spaces today only shadow the commercial art sector. The public sector, the public art sector, is only a shadow of the commercial art sector. Public culture, insofar as public presentation of contemporary art contributes to public culture is not then just coherent with the moral good of the primary market, it is an extension of it. Important in its external validation of the primary market in its cartelization. The moral agency of the primary market cartel regarding both marketization and art at the same time extends to its having civic virtue. By public exhibition, the primary market, its moral good, becomes a civic virtue. And on just this basis, to refer to the protests around this Biennale, on just this basis, sponsorship of cultural and artistic events are taken to be a civic virtue. In any case, civic virtue is not then distinct to marketization, but of course it is a different kind of market for corporate sponsorship than it is with the cartelization of art's primary market, even if it's the same agents, the vectors of civic virtue through marketization are different. It's okay, I'm fine. Not to me, it's fine. So shadowing the primary market, in its shadowing of the primary market, the public exhibition sector takes its part in a nexus in which both the price and moral virtue of art are simultaneously constituted and maintained on the basis of a cartelized structure and dynamics of the primary market. Okay, so the civic virtue of art supports and maintains the cartelized structure of the primary market. This cartelization extends to and determines the public exhibition of art, forming what it's a kind of complex and ugly formulation, what could be called a cartelized market public exhibition nexus. Okay? And it's an unwieldy term which I'll abbreviate just to contemporary art cartelization. But by that, it needs to be understood that it has a private aspect, which is the primary market, and a public aspect, which is the civic virtue of public exhibition. Contemporary arts cartelization. Reputation is one index of that nexus of contemporary arts cartelization in both private and public aspects as they mobilize one another. If exhibition at public venue enhances reputation by signaling that an art or artist has significance beyond the concerns and collusions of private interests constituting a neoclassical market, what is being effectively shaped by such exhibitions in the public is cultural wealth in common. Such wealth is the cultural determination of the civic virtue afforded by exhibitions in public venues. That's quite a condensed formulation which I'll elaborate now. Cultural wealth is now only the public aspect of the contemporary art cartel. Okay. Cultural wealth is now only the public aspect of the contemporary art cartel. Since cartelization is another name for an unaccountable concentration of power of whatever kind, the constitution of cultural wealth by contemporary art cartelization are institutions of contemporary art. This results in a concentration of art's cultural wealth by those who form that cartel being, to repeat, a privately organized, necessarily non-transparent, quasi-formal market and distribution system. Okay, the main point being that the constitution of cultural wealth results in a concentration of art's cultural wealth. Or rather, sorry, the constitution of cultural wealth by contemporary arts cartelization results in a concentration of art's cultural wealth. And this is the same point already noted on the doubling of moral and market transactions in the primary market. If you remember, I was saying that in the primary market, the commercial transaction is at once a moral act. Okay? It's an act of moral good. Only in the primary market, not in the secondary market. And I think that's the same point being replayed now at an aggregate and public level. The public exhibition sector presents the concentration of cultural and artistic wealth, distribution and transmission, the cartelized effect of the primary market in its public exhibition. It presents that as a civic virtue, as a moral act. What then is meant by, what is then meant? What is then meant by the public of public art institutions? That the public has indeed transmogrified not only in relation to contemporary art, but also more generally is the central point of this talk. This limited mutation of the public of contemporary art are now linked systematically to its broader transformation in neoliberalism. Neoliberalism, because the main characteristic of neoliberalism and the main effect is precisely the concentration of capital wealth. Okay, so the argument is that primary art market cartelization concentrates cultural wealth. Neoliberalism is a concentration of capital wealth, and the question is how these two concentrations of wealth are connected or interlinked. Of course, the phrasing concentration of cultural and artistic wealth I've been using has been deployed to facilitate exactly this connection between the two processes. But this is not, in fact, an explanation, but is only the formulation, at best, of a loose analogy. What still needs to be explained to solidify the relationship between these two moments of increasing concentration of the art of contemporary art on the one hand and neoliberalism on the other hand is an elaboration of neoliberalism's goals and practices. Of course, I can't give an adequate elaboration of this in this paper in the time I have, but a cursory sketch will suffice to give definite shape to the relationship. And with that sort of basic understanding or basic outline of neoliberalism, we'll also be able to get a more precise determination of the counter-politics that can redress the inequalities generated by both processes of concentration, each of them alone, but also together. Now, it's been well captured in the sloganeering of the Occupy protests and the 99% movement that the dominant effect and success of neoliberalism, success in its own terms, is the concentration of capital wealth by ever smaller proportions of national and global populations. This is the process of increasing capital and wealth inequality between the very richest and the rest of the population, Of course, it's not just the 1%, but more accurately, the 0.1%, or more accurately yet, the 0.01%, who are capturing more and more of national and global wealth. In very reduced formulations, the tactics mobilized in neoliberalism to redistribute wealth in favor of the ruling elite include wage suppression, meaning more profits. If there's revenue into a company and wages are kept low, more of the revenue goes to the owners of the company, which is to say more profits to corporations and the owners of capital. Low inflation, lower taxes, deregulation of private finance and credit, low interest rates, transfer of social goods such as education, housing, transport, health, and so on, from state to the private sector, both in its provision, who provides all of this, and also in its costs, who pays for all of this. The effect and transmission mechanism of these transformations, the package, the tactics of neoliberalism, the effect and transmission mechanism of these transformations wrought by decreasing personal revenues because of wage suppression and increasing unemployment precarity, but also by increasing costs because more of the provisions and services for social reproduction, such as health, transport, education, and so on, are borne by individuals and households. So costs increase at the same time that income is going down. The transmission mechanism that allows societies to continue operating in some capacity through these transformations, for those who are not owners of capital, is of course escalating private and household debt. If you have decreasing income, increasing outgoings, the way you cover that difference is through debt, taking out debt. That's at the individual level. At an aggregate level, there's a transfer of national debt from the state, public debt, to private and household debt. In America, this is the Clinton years. Low interest rates help make the increased debt load tolerable. They have to be at about 5 to 6% or lower, because higher interest rates would mean that more money would be going towards debt repayment and therefore less on consumption, which is the engine of the economy, capitalist economy. The partial replacement of wage income by increased debt loads also puts creditors, the financial sector, in a central and critical structural position for the continued functioning of the economies. Okay? So as debt becomes more important to private households and within the sort of the global picture of national economies, creditors who provide debt, the finance sector, become more and more critical and crucial to the functioning of the economy. The centralization of credit to regular economic functioning at personal, national, and international levels is what is now called financialization. Okay, it's the major political economic transformation of the past 40 years. This privatization of debts took a hit and partly reversed by the 2008 financial crisis, when states had to rapidly increase their borrowing to bail out the credit institutions financing just this debt transfer. And of course, the kind of political necessity of bailing out those finance institutions can now be understood, because debt, it's partly to do with the kind of freezing up of the credit markets because of toxic assets. But it's also that debt is fundamental, it's not key, it's a crucial, critical element of the operation of economies outside of the finance markets themselves. So it was absolutely politically imperative to finance to creditize the finance institutions in order to keep the economies going. This neoliberal schema was reestablished despite what the funding of the credit institution meant was states had to take out debt. Okay, the 20 years before that had been about states transferring debt to the private sector, but in order to finance the credit institutions, the states had to kind of recapitalize the credit institutions and take out debt. Of course, that was paid for through increased taxation, decreased job security and social services, the austerity package, and in the US, pumping money into the credit systems. The main point to be established through these details, and this very crude and inadequate sketch of the main tactics of neoliberalism, are twofold. Firstly, financialization is a transformation of the critical sources of capital accumulation, going from industry to credit and rent. And the key political point here is that in industry, workers have power by withdrawing their labor. If capital accumulation now moves to credit and rent, the withdrawal of labor has minimal, negligible political consequence. Other political strategies are needed against capital accumulation in conditions of financialization. Secondly, the second main point is that in extracting revenues and capital from relatively low-wage debtors to the owners of capital and to creditors, financialization is a major mechanism for the concentration of capital wealth. Money goes to creditors, to the owners of capital. Such a concentration is, as I've just said, a concentration of ownership, business corporatization, which is to say of rule. You know, owning things means the ability to rule. And also of credit, which is to say of control, because credit is a form of controlling future incomes and behaviors. This twofold concentration of capital wealth can be combined in one term covering both rule and control. Financialization is a concentration of power. And here I rely on the analysis of the economists Jonathan Nitzan and Shimshon Bichler. Now that's a very brief and, as I said, very rudimentary outline of neoliberalism. But it provides enough for, which I did in about 10 minutes. So, yeah. Even this brief outline provides enough of a basis to elaborate the key political move of neoliberalism, which is its conservative revolution of the category of the public. Okay? What I've described are kind of economic strategies, or economic tactics of neoliberalism, but what's going on politically is a conservative revolution of the public. It is in its specific contribution to this regression of what constitutes a public and how a public is constituted that contemporary art's cartelization will be seen to contribute. Okay? So I now need to do kind of fairly theoretical, rudimentary outline of the reconfiguration of a public in neoliberalism, and I'll then return to how contemporary art consolidates this move. The revolution imposed by neoliberalism, and it is a revolution, is in the privatization of national wealth and debt. Okay, the privatization of national wealth and national debt. Privatization means three things, which I've partly mentioned before. Firstly, the transfer of resources and services from state control to private corporations and their owners. Secondly, privatization is the transfer of state debt to private debt, and therefore to the creditors and to the finance sector. And thirdly, privatization is the deregulation of finance and banking to enable the expansion and greater mobility of speculative capital for new forms of debt and credit. Okay. Now, these privatizations are not only economic, but also rely upon and configure the conditions of political operation. While they shift power away from the state, while neoliberal activists mobilize the state to shift power away from it, this is the neoconservative moment. While neoliberal activists mobilize the state to shift power away from the state, power is not atomized into private concerns of individuals. Okay? So the political rhetoric is that power and people should have more control of their own lives and so on and so forth. And this seems to be an atomization of power from state forces to individuals. But that's not actually what neoliberalism does, as we know in practice. Control and rule are rather effected by the state in support of creditors and owners, which is to say, in support of the concentration of wealth and power outside of the state. Okay? The political rhetoric is to move power towards individuals, but insofar as this shift is towards owners of capital and to creditors, what actually is happening is a transfer of power to those constituencies, which is to say a shift of power in order to consolidate and facilitate and consolidate the concentration of wealth in private hands. This privatized domain of power is that of liberal civil society. This collective agent is the public. To be clear, the public of liberal civil society is precisely counterposed to the state and its functionaries insofar as civil societies where and how privately motivated interests collaborate with and contest one another in public, as the public. Okay, this is the kind of classical, or modern classical definition of the public. Moreover, the public of civil society has power over the state because civil society expresses the private interests of its citizens, and the liberal state is to serve and protect private interests. In this European bourgeois notion of civil society, the public is privately constituted and provides the terms of rule and control to the state. Whatever collectivity the public has is formed on the basis of, from, the agglomeration of private concerns whose mediation civil society permits and institutionalizes as power. These institutions of civil society themselves these institutions have to be private, otherwise they're state institutions and therefore not part of civil society. Okay, so the institutions of civil society are independent of state power. They're private institutions. It's on this basis that the modern economics of the free market are premised and institutionalized. Okay? So here I follow Foucault's analysis, Michel Foucault's analysis in The Birth of Biopolitics, where he points out that civil society is generated and sort of instituted in order to facilitate an expansion of economics outside of state power. And the name of the political agent for that expansion is, of course, the European bourgeois. But we can't have modern economics without civil society as its condition, as its operational and theoretical condition. In redistributing power away from state formation, again, neoliberalism's privatizations assert this modern notion of civil society. As such, neoliberalism is at once conservative because it preserves the privately constituted public that emerged in Europe in the 17th, 18th century. And it's also revolutionary. Revolutionary in the sense that it goes back to, it revolves back to an earlier variant of the public after its statist formation in the mid-20th century. This political revolution, the assertion of the public of civil society, this political revolution is a necessary correlate to the redistribution of capital wealth through private rather than state channels. What is important in this redistribution, in this political revolution? What is important is that neoliberalism is a public formulation of wealth. Okay? Neoliberalism is a public formulation of wealth. The public being configured in terms of civil society, not the state. Neoliberal activists mobilize state and international authorities to deregulate markets, transfer social goods to service providers, and so on. But this is not to dispel power as such, but to appropriate it through public capital, a public constituted by the private agencies of commerce and financialization. Okay? So my claim is that public capital is another name for the privatization of capital wealth by the private sector in its concentrated form. Yeah. Civil society is the condition and term of the neoliberal organization of power through capital markets and financialization, which is to say as public capital. Public capital is the concentration of capital wealth to a ruling elite, who can put intense political and economic pressure on state organizations to liberate capital as a public good. A ruling elite constituted then not primarily by proximity to the state or as agents of the state, but as private actors who can literally afford, to be independent of the state in a way that many of us cannot. The other side of such public capital is that the costs of public goods, such as health, housing, education, transport, and so on, are carried directly by private individuals, and that the debt loads of private individuals and of states to bond markets, ratings agencies, and other offices of this transfer of power to civil society determined through public capital. So to come back to the conclusion where I bring together contemporary art's concentration of wealth and neoliberalism's concentration of wealth, distinct wealth in both cases. Public capital in neoliberalism is the concentration of capital wealth to ruling elite. While this power concentration is analogous to the concentration of cultural and artistic wealth by contemporary art's cartelization, and while the connection between the two seems compelling because each has gained prominence over the same period, the last 30 years or so, they cannot be directly identified. In fact, they should not be directly identified because, as we saw, contemporary art cartelization precisely blocks and resists the domination of market forces characteristic of neoliberalism. Okay. So part of the morality, the moral fable of the primary market is that it's a block and a resistance to the rapacious pricing structures of neoliberalism. On this account, the two concentrations of wealth, cultural and artistic on the one side and of capital on the other, are in fact opposed to one another. Art's moral virtue is distinct to the gains from profit. Though the relation between contemporary art and neoliberalism isn't one of direct identification and rejects causal explanation, they nonetheless commonly assert and affirm civil society. The primary market public exhibition cartel, the contemporary arts cartelization, is constituted exactly and precisely in order to preserve and exhibit art as a civic virtue, the public aspect of the primary market as a moral agent vectored through and for art. Such a civic virtue is a moral claim for and of civil society. Contemporary arts cartelization is why it is best placed, why the primary market and its shadow organizations are best placed to determine exhibition, distribution, and worth, meaning artistic and cultural wealth. Neoliberalism affirms civil society, so that's the contemporary art cartelization on the one hand, and its concentration of wealth. Neoliberalism, as we've seen, affirms civil society by the transfer of capital wealth to private ownership, to public power beside the state, and now equal to it, if not more powerful than it. So on the one hand, the public aspect of contemporary arts cartelization is a presentation of civic virtue, a moral good of civil society. And on the other, neoliberal subordination of state power is the assertion of the power of public capital, of civil society. Now, these two affirmations of civil society can be mobilized together. Even if it is set against price-led exchange of open markets, contemporary art literally exhibits, literally shows, through its exhibition structures, through its shadow public organizations, that cartelization, the concentration of wealth and influence, is a moral good. Okay? Contemporary art shows that cartelization is a moral good. That free markets, such as the contemporary art market, free markets can be morally constituted, and to the extent that they can, that they can even seek to gain, they can even seek to not gain the best price per trade. They're that moral. This regulation of a market from below, the contemporary art model, serves as a paradigmatic case that all unregulated markets, all exchanges in civil society, all commercial exchanges in civil society, can generate civic virtue if they're highly concentrated. As such, contemporary arts cartelization captures the ethos of neoliberalization. And that ethos is that public capital is a civic virtue. Public capital is a civic virtue. And I think it's testimony to the genius and ideological cunning of neoliberalism that this formula is completely reversed from its modern socialist sense. This formula, public capital is a civic virtue, is completely reversed from its modern socialist sense of widening the contribution and collective gain of both capital and virtue, which is what the socialists were saying in the 19th to mid-20th century. And what it now means is the narrowing of collective gains towards an already established elite. Okay, so the formulation, public capital is a civic virtue, is another way of saying let's concentrate capital wealth. The private constitution of public capital is a civic virtue, even if it is now at the cost of a general depredation and steeper hierarchies in wealth and income. Even if most do badly out of it, it's still a civic virtue. Even if the agents of privatization and financialization do not directly call upon contemporary arts cartelization to provide legitimation for the concentration of capital wealth from which they gain, and it's, I think, only of anecdotal interest whether art collectors or benefactors are hedge fund managers or local investment banks and the rest of it. The concentration of public wealth can be taken to be a civic virtue because it transfers wealth to civil society, to privately constituted civil society, to the modern public. What both contemporary arts cartelization and neoliberalism demonstrate in effect is that civil society today, which is to say the modern public, means the increasing concentration of wealth. Contemporary art is the explicitly moral wing of this transformation. Finance and corporatism are its explicitly capitalized wing. Yet each implicitly conveys the other and legitimates it. The civic virtue demonstrated by contemporary art gives credence to the increased power of concentrated capital wealth, and the power of that concentration of wealth gives the contemporary art cartel its rule over art's significance. What is assembled by the two together is the virtue and power of civil society. Virtue on the side of contemporary art, power on the side of neoliberal civil society. Okay? The two together, assembled together, present the virtue and power of civil society, its authority, as a name to cover both virtue and power. If it was once the authority of the state that had to be contested for the sake of emancipation and greater equality, it is now also this authority of civil society that must be undone today, and on both sides, on the side of contemporary arts cartelization and on the side of neoliberalism. Thank you.
Suhail, thank you very much for a fantastic paper and also for really unpicking, very literally, our title. So thank you, Public Capital. It's very good, thank you. Haldun, a different perspective. So to reintroduce Haldun, who is probably known to many people in this room, H.Dostoğlu is the founding director of a very long established Istanbul a Turkish institution, Gallery Nev. Haldun, thank you very much.
Öncelikle benden önce konuşan Suhail Bey'in sunumundaki büyük, önemli katkılarından dolayı kendisine teşekkür etmek isterim. Sonra da Andrea ve Fulya'ya benim programlarına davet ettikleri için de ayrıca teşekkür ederim. Ben bugün size yapacağım sunumda çoğunuzun belki de çok yakından bildiği, kurucusu olduğum galerinin kurulduğundan bugüne kadar geçirdiği süreci kısaca özetleyeceğim. Bu özeti yaparken de bu süreç içinde Türkiye, özellikle de İstanbul sanat ortamının nasıl bir süreç izlediği, nasıl geliştiğine dair de bildiğiniz hatırlatmaları yapmak istiyorum. Galeri Nev 2 Mayıs 1984'te kuruldu. İlk sergisini 2 Mayıs 1984'te Ankara'da Abi Dingino ile açtı. Demek ki aşağı yukarı 10 gün önce 29 yılını tamamladı. 30 yılından gün almaya başlayan bir galeri. İstanbul Sanat Ortamı'nda Galeri Nev'den daha eski kurulmuş 2 galeri daha var. Her ikisi de 1975 yılında kurulmuş Yahşi Baraz Sanat Galerisi'nin ardından Galeri Nev'de sanat ortamımızın yaşlı 3. galerisi olarak kaydetmek mümkün. Galeri Nev'in kurulduğu yıllarda 1984'te kuruldu. Ben ve kurucusu birlikte galeriyi kurduğumuz Ali Artun 1983 yılının sonunda her ikimiz de mezun olduğumuz üniversite bölümünden, mimarlık bölümünden mezun olduk. Mimarlık yapmayacağımızı biliyorduk, o kararı vermiştik. Ama ne yapacağımıza dair bir kararımız yoktu. Üniversite yıllarından hocamız olan Paul Martin'in bizi o kadar iyi etmiş ki, teşekkürler Paul. Mimarlık dışında da başka bir şeyler yapabilme cesaretini edinmişiz o yıllardan ki sanat alanında belki biz daha ziyade dergiciliğe doğru böyle tartışmalarımızı sürdürürken bir başka arkadaşımızın önerisiyle Selçuk Kömürer, kendisi Paris'te yaşıyor, biz galeri açmaya karar verdik. Ama bu galeri açmaya karar verdiğimiz gün galericilik, sanat galericiliği, sanatçı, ilişkiler, koleksiyon, en ufak bir fikrimiz yok. Tamamen yüzde bilmeyen birinin uzatlaması gibi 2 Mayıs 1984'te Abidin Dünel'i açtığımızda biz hayatımızda da yeni bir macera, yeni bir öğrenme dönemi başladı. Kısaca bir hatırlatma yapmak istiyorum size. Hepinizin bildiği gibi. Birincisini 1971 yılında üniversitedeyken yaşadığımız, ikincisini de mezun olduktan sonra 80'de yaşadığımız iki ağır askeri darbe geçirmiş bir genç nesildik o sırada. Birincisi üniversitede, ikincisi daha sonra. Ve 84 yılı ağır 12 Eylül rejiminin bütün şartlarını sürmekte olduğu bir dönemdi. 24 Ocak kararlarıyla da Turgut Özal'ın programı çerçevesinde gerçekleştirilen 24 Ocak kararlarıyla da ve 1984'teki askeri darbeden sonraki ilk yerel seçimlerde seçimi kazanan Anavatan Partisi'nin lideri yine Turgut Özal'ın programıyla da Suhail az önceki programında da sunumunda da dile getirdiği gibi Türkiye'de ilk kez neoliberal ekonomilerin de programa sokulduğu, gündeme alındığı yıllardı. Ve bu program çerçevesinde de müteşebbislik de bir nevi teşvik edilen konulardan biriydi. Biraz belki bu nedenle ama daha önemlisi 80 sonrasının nefes alma ortamı yaratma güçlerinden kaynaklanarak 84 yılında bizimle birlikte birkaç galeri daha açıldı Ankara'da ve İstanbul'da. Uras Sanat Galerisi, Tem Sanat Galerisi, Teşvikiye Sanat Galerisi, Ankara'da Siyah Beyaz Sanat Galerisi aynı yıllar açılan galerilerdir. Bunların arasında Uras hariç sanıyorum diğer hepsi hala faaliyetlerini sürdürüyorlar. BM Beralmada'yı da atlamamak lazım bu arada. Bizden önce ne vardı? Şöyle bir hatırlamaya çalışırsak, sanat piyasası ile ilgili 1970'lere kadar Türkiye'de herhangi bir olgudan söz etmek mümkün değil. En önemli alıcı Cumhuriyet'in ilk yıllarında, yüzyılın ilk yarısında devlet. Daha sonra da Cumhuriyet'le birlikte kurulan bir takım bankalar, İş Bankası, Ziraat Bankası gibi kurumlar sanat alanının belki de tek alıcılarıydı. İki kişiden söz etmek gerekirse de Cimcoz ailesi ile Dili de atlamamak gerekir. 80'lerden önce kurulan galeriler, Laşi, Baraz ve başka sanat galerisinden de önce ilk öncü galeriler, Maya Sanat Galerisi var, Cimcoz ailesinin kurduğu. Ankara'da Helikon, İstanbul'da Melda Kaptan'a, İlhan Koma'nın ilk eşidir Melda Kaptan'a halen hayatta. Ve Mefkure Şerbetçi'nin 1969 yılında kurduğu galeriler 60'lı yılların galeriler ortamıydılar. 70'lerde ise Cuma'lı, Artizan, Baraz ve başka sanattan söz ettik. Bu dört galerinin en önemli özelliği Türkiye'de, İstanbul'da özellikle sanat eseriyle, sanatçıyla koleksiyonerin ilk kez buluştuğu alanları yarattılar. Belki de ilk bugünkü anlamda koleksiyonerler bu dört galerinin çabalarıyla, girişimleriyle oluşmaya başladı. Bir özellik ise bu galerilerin yaptığı, o güne kadar çok ağır akademiya baskısı altında olan sanat ortamı sivilleşmeye, kendi kendine örgütlenmeye, sanatçılar daha sivil alanlarda izleyiciyle buluşmaya başladı. 80'li yıllarla birlikte, yani bizimle birlikte Uras, Siyah Beyaz, Nev, Tem, BM, Arkeon, Teşvikiye gibi galeriler ise Türkiye'de sanat piyasasının oluşmasını ilk sağlayan kurumlardır. Yani piyasa denen mefhumdan söz edeceksek belki 80'li yıllarda bu galerilerin girişimleri sayesinde olduğunu söylemek mümkün. Bu galeriler aynı zamanda izleyiciyle sürüp giden piyasa ilişkisini kurarken de çok önemli, sanat alanının çok önemli bence sac ayağı olan sanatçı, galerici, koleksiyoner üçgeninin doğru dengelerde durmasını sağlamayan ilk girişimleri yapan kurumlardır. Bir hatırlatma daha yapacağım. Sözünü ettiğimiz yıllarda henüz daha İstanbul Bienali yok. İstanbul Modern yok, Kara Müzesi yok, Sabancı Müzesi yok. Yani Türkiye'de sanat izleyiciye sadece galerilerde buluşuyor. Fuarlar da yok. Müzayede evleri de bugünkü kadar güçlü değiller. Var olanlar da sadece antika eserleri gösteriyorlar. Yani birinci el piyasası, sanat ortamının tek hakim ortamı. Bu yıllar, bugün hepinizin çok iyi bildiği bir kuşağında, yani Mehmet Güler Yüz, Burhan Doğançay, Alaaddin Aksoy gibi isimlere sahip çoğaltmak mümkün. İlk seyirciyle buluştuğu, gözüktüğü ve bunların koleksiyonerlere ve koleksiyonerlerin beğenisini kazandığı yıllardır. Galeri Nev, biz 1984'te Abidin Dino ile kurulduktan sonra 1987 yılında da İstanbul'a geldim ben. O günden beri de bu şehirde İstanbul ayağında açtık. Ankara'da bu işin sadece Ankara'da gitmeyeceğini, kültürün metropol ortamlarında tüketildiğini hemen fark ederek İstanbul'da da yer almak için 87'de geldik ve 89-90'a kadar da 84'ten 90'a kadar göstermekte olduğumuz bir kuşak vardı. Az önce isimlerini saydığım kuşak. Mehmet Güler, Kur'an Doğançay, Alaaddin Aksoy, Yavaş, Ergin İnan vesaire vesaire. 90 yılında ya da 89'un sonlarında şöyle bir fikir gelişmeye başladı bende. Bu sözünü ettiğim sanatçılar bizden önce var oldukları için, bir galeri düzeninde çalışma etiğine alışık olmadıkları için, kendi kariyerlerini bizden önce kurdukları için bir galeri disiplini içinde çalışamayacaklarını hissedince bir. İkincisi de yine bu isimlerle eğer bizim galeri uluslararası arenada bir kariyer elde etmek istiyorsa bu isimlerle çok kolay olmayacağını varsayarak bir gece değil ama böyle kısa bir sürede bütün bu programı, kadroyu değiştirip o günler için çok genç olan, hatta hiç sergi açmamış olan bir kuşakla yola devam etme kararı aldı. O kuşak hala şu anda da galerinin en temel kuşağı olarak gidiyor. Bu kuşağa eklenen 5-6 isim daha oldu zaman içinde. O yıl verdiğimiz bu kararın şimdi dönüp baktığımda çok belki riskli ama çok doğru olduğunu şimdi daha iyi anlayabiliyorum. Çalışmaya başladığımız kuşakla kariyerlerimizi birlikte kurduk ve bir galeri etiği oluşturduk ve bu etik izleyiciyle buluştuğunda hiç daha önce görülmemiş olan bu kuşağın görünür hale gelmesiyle birlikte de koleksiyoner çevresi, sanat izleyicisi çevresi de bu kuşakla ilk tanışmaya başladı. Bunu yapan sadece biz değildik, onu da belirtmemde fayda var. BM Sanat Galerisi o yıllarda bizden daha genç kuşağı gösteriyordu. Urart Galerisi keza öyle. Dolayısıyla da 80'lerin sonu 90'ların başına girerken Türkiye çok yeni bir kuşağın ilk kez görünür olduğu bir galeriler ortamındaydı. Bu kuşak ki her ne kadar görünür oldu diyorsam da koleksiyonerlerin koleksiyonlarına katmayı çok arzu ettikleri isimler de değildi. Bunların arasında Ayşe Ekmen, Gülsün Kara Mustafa, Serhat Kiraz, Hüseyin Aktekin, Erda Aksel, Ebru Özseçen, Aydan Mürtezaoğlu vesaire gibi isimler var. Bu isimler uluslararası arenada tanınmaya başlanırken, uluslararası sergilere davet alırken Türk koleksiyonerlerin hiçbirisinin de henüz o yıllarda henüz ilgisini çekmemişti. 90'lara girdiğimizde çok önemli birkaç şey daha oldu sanat ortamımızda. Bir tanesi ilki 87'de gerçekleşen, 13.'sü de önümüzdeki Eylül ayında organize edilecek olan İstanbul Bienali hayatımıza girdi. Bu birincisi. İkincisi ise birincisi 91 yılında Uluslararası Plastik Sanatlar Derneği tarafından organize edilen ilk sanat fuarı ile birlikte piyasa, tırnak içinde piyasa örgütlenmeye başladı. Bir şey daha, ilk kez açık artırma evleri, müzayede evleri gündemlerine o günün sanatını da sokmaya başladılar. Dolayısıyla 90'lar belki de sanat piyasasının örgütlenmeye başladığı ve yıllar olduğunu söylemek hiç yanlış olmaz. 2000'li yıllara geldiğimizde ise ülkemiz neoliberal ekonomilerin dolu dizgin binmiş koşturmakta. Sanayicilerimiz, iş adamlarımız, müteşebbislerimiz dünya standartlarında işler üretmekte. Finans sektörü, reklam sektörü, tekstil sektörü, yapı üretimi sektörü uluslararası kalitede işler üretmekte. Mimarlarımız, tasarımcılarımız yaptıkları ürünler yine uluslararası arenada takdir bulmakta, takdirle karşılaşmakta. Türkiye sanat piyasası da bu dönüşümden, bu etkileşimden, bu küreselleşmeden kendi adına hem nasibini almakta hem de buna hazırlanmakta. Birkaç tane önemli değişiklik oldu 2000'li yıllara geldiğimizde. İstanbul'daki galeri sayısında çok önemli bir artış oldu. Bir. İkincisi, Türkiye'deki sanat okullarının sayısında çok önemli bir artış oldu. Hatta bu artış o kadar dramatiktir ki beni hala korkutur. 84 yılında Türkiye'deki Güzel Sanatlar Fakültesi, Fine Arts Akademi, özel okullardan söz etmiyorum, hepsi devlet, 6 tane iken şimdi 82 tane Güzel Sanatlar Fakültesi var ülkede. Bunlar kim öğretim yapıyor, kimler nasıl eğitim alıyorlar, doğrusunu isterseniz hiçbir fikrim yok. Birkaç tanesi haricinde. Ve bir değişiklik de, bunu ben önemli buluyorum ve üzerine hep basarak söylüyorum. Sanat ortamı maskülen bir ortamdan olmaktan çıktı, feminen bir ortam haline geldi. Genç sanatçıların birçoğu kadın, genç galericilerin hepsi kadın. Çok önemli kadın sanatçılar, çok önemli uluslararası sergilerde çok kuvvetli işler üreterek, kusura bakma Ali, bir tek Ali erkek. Tabii bütün bu hızlı gelişme, bütün bu hızlı dönüşüm ister istemez alanda sirküle eden para hacminin büyümesi doğal olarak bu alanda para üzerine oynayan insanların da girmesine yol açtı. Bunu hepimiz de yaşamaktayız halen. Spekülatörler, koleksiyonerlerin önünde bir mevzi aldılar. Müzayede evleri ikinci el piyasası olmaktan çıkıp birinci el piyasası olma çabasına giriştiler ve girişmekteler. Alan bu iki ayrı girişimle, iki ayrı neden sayesinde, nedenle de doğal olarak kendi zemini üzerinde çok güvenli duramamaya başladı. Bu hızlı dönüşüme kendini kaptıran sanatçıların sayısı çoğaldı. Ama bunun dışında kalan, medya, piyasa ilişkilerinden uzak duran ve en önemlisi de, yine çok sık tekrarladığım bir şey bu, niçin sanat ürettiği sorusunu kendisine sık sık soran sanatçılar sayesinde ve bunların ürettiği sanatın sanat tutkunları tarafından takdir edilmesi sayesinde de alan kendini temiz zeminlerde korumaya devam ediyor. Bu süreçte atlamamak istediğim bir şey daha var. Onu da söyleyeceğim ve bitireceğim. Bu 80'lerden bu yana gelirken birçoğunuz belki hatırlamayabilirsiniz ama 80'lerin ortasından sonra 90'ların ortasına kadar aklınıza ne kadar banka geliyorsa hepsinin galerisi vardı. Hatta bazı bankaların şubelerinin bile galerisi vardı tek tek. Bu süreç 2001 krizinden itibaren Türkiye'de yaşanan yeni ekonomik politikalarla bir sürü bankanın kapanmış olmasıyla birlikte bu süreçte sona erdi. Ve şimdi birçok banka kendi asli işlevlerine bankacılığa geri döndüler. Birçok bankada sadece birkaç banka sanat alanında galericilikle devam etmekte. Fakat bunların arasında bir tanesinin Garanti Bankası'nın konumunu kurduğu arşiv ve kütüphanesi nedeniyle de takdir etmek lazım. Şimdi bu sanat piyasasındaki bütün bu kısaca söz ettiğim süreç aslında dünya sanat piyasasına baktığımızda biz henüz emekleme devresinde olduğumuzu da gösteriyor. Her ne kadar artık İstanbul dünya sanat haritasında çok önemli bir konumda ise de Türk sanatçıları çok önemli koleksiyoner, müze koleksiyonlarına girmiş ise de Türk galericiliği uluslararası çapta, güçte yol alacak iktisadi güce, ekonomik güce henüz ulaşmadılar. Bu da önümüzdeki yılların yatırımlarıyla olacak bir şey. Hala eksik olduğumuz çok önemli bir şey de bir noktada. Türkiye'de sanat üretiminin kalitesi, uluslararası standartın zaman zaman çok üstünde olmasına rağmen sanat yazımı maalesef hala çok zayıf duruyor. Sanatçılar entelektüel olarak beslenmekte zorlanıyorlar. Belki de yatırımı bu yöne yapmakta 82 tane Güzel Sanatlar Fakültesi yerine başka fakülteler açmakta yarar var. Ben sunumu burada bitirmek istiyorum.